Hi, my name is Jennifer Matos. I'm the Executive Director of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, and I'm bringing you the 30th edition of our Armchair Tour of West Hartford history. I'm coming to you right off of Prospect Avenue near the Hartford-West Hartford line. It's a very busy street. You'll see lots of traffic going by me. And this, actually, believe it or not, was once a really pastoral farmland all over here. And when it was developed in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was known as Frenchtown. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Frenchtown and also about a haunted house that once stood on the street I'm standing in front of, which is Mozart Street. So the story of Frenchtown begins with a man named Bernard Caya. Caya was born in Canada in 1851, and he came to the United States and Hartford in particular right after the Civil War to find a pretty profitable job in the arms manufacturing business. But he also happened to be a carpenter by trade. So he actually lived in Hartford and built his own house. Had a friend come over and take a look at his house and said, "This house is great, I'd like to buy it from you." And from that point on, Bernard Caya realized that the house building industry could be something that he was good at and that could be pretty profitable for him. So he ends up buying an 11-acre farm of right here in West Hartford in this area, owned by the Hayes family. And he actually, for the meantime, lives in the old farmhouse with his children. He actually has an astounding number of children, 14 to be precise. And he and his wife would live in the house with the children, but part of the time his wife would actually travel to her family home in Canada, and that's where she would actually go to birth her children. So at any given time you might find half of the children living with Bernard and the other half of the children living in Canada with his wife. Well, while he was getting started here, he was talking to his neighbors. So a couple names you'll be familiar with. There's William Westphal and Ellie Lavoie. They were all neighbors owning adjoining farms, and together they laid out the streets that would be known as Frenchtown. So Caya, Boulanger, and Levesque Avenues, and Westphal and Mozart Streets. And basically what happened is, because there were a lot of French Canadian families living here, and someone like Caya was a good businessman, and he was telling all of his acquaintances, "Oh, you got to check out the new area I'm developing. It's so peaceful, it's so rural, there are still a lot of farms here." So they came and checked it out, and they started asking him to build houses and moving into the area. Now, ironically, this area of West Hartford was somewhat busy, just a few blocks down from here. So a few blocks south from here is where Charter Oak Racetrack was, which we talked about a few months ago. This was a very popular spot for gambling and entertainment. It was part of the harness racing circuit in America. And actually, the corner of New Park Avenue in Oakwood was known as the Point. So when Caya moved here, it would have been called the Point. But as more and more French Canadians moved in, and then you have all these street names being named with these French Canadian surnames, the area became known as Frenchtown. So the children of this neighborhood would have attended a one-room schoolhouse that was located on the southeast corner of Flatbush and Oakwood. And even at that time, it was known as Charter Oak School. So in the relatively same location as the current Charter Oak School, but this was a one-room schoolhouse that was built in the 1880s. And so the children from all of this area would have been walking to school back and forth. And legend has it that sometimes they used the street that I'm standing in front of, which is Mozart Street. And Mozart Street at that point was not really developed yet. These streets were laid out, but the houses kind of came in slowly. I looked at an 1896 map of West Hartford, which I'll post along with this video, and there were no houses listed in many of these streets. According to an article in the Hartford Courant from September of 1913, there was one old house located on Mozart Street. So not a new house that had been built as part of the development, but likely an old farmhouse that had been purchased along with a parcel of farmland. And this house had been unoccupied for several years and was pretty dilapidated and presented a very spooky appearance to the school children as they passed by. So the legend and the story that was in the Hartford Courant says that the children would pass by this house and knew it was deserted and could see it was run down and dilapidated and overgrown. And they kind of tiptoed when they went by it, and they whispered to each other, and it was definitely something that they feared a little bit. And of course they would tell other people about it. So people knew about this deserted house. Probably didn't chalk it up to anything more than some schoolhouse stories, except for that some of the adults in the neighborhood also began to notice some strange things going around. Every now and then they would hear an automobile over in this area where no one was supposed to be living, and sometimes they would hear voices and even shouting in the early morning hours, perhaps shouting something like 3 aces or 4 flushes. And so the neighbors started to kind of check things out a little bit, and what they discovered is that the house was actually being used for gambling. So we don't know if maybe some of the men who were doing their gambling over at Charter Oak Racetrack after hours were kind of coming over here into this deserted house to kind of take a pickup game of poker or something. But we do know that they were observed. So the neighbors observed the men going into the house and staying in for many hours. They contacted the police, and the police were planning on busting this group of gamblers. Now, it's supposed that one of the town constables was so excited by the idea of this bust that he might have leaked the information to some of his friends. And maybe that information got to some of the gamblers, because the night they went to do the bust, they observed 18 men going into the building. They waited a little bit to let the game kind of get hot. And then when they went to bust the gambling match, the men were gone. All they found were empty tables and chairs and kind of a smell of gas. The house was dark and deserted, and no one knows who they were or where they went. So that's the legend of the haunted house of Mozart Street. We know probably wasn't actually haunted, but really used as a deserted building by people for a pickup poker game on Mozart Street of all places. I hope you learned a little bit something new, a little bit about Frenchtown and the Point and Bernard Caya, and I hope I'll see you next week. Thanks.